This webinar today is about a couple different things. It's about the first aspect of a kind of a six-pronged test of following attorneys, of how to hire attorneys that we've been following here for quite a long time. And I typically give a webinar every week and I have been for a long time, for attorneys, and I'd like to do going forward, do the same thing for law firms and legal employers each week as well. And the reason is because there's a lot of information out there, and but not a lot of it has really been consolidated and taught to people. And so obviously a law firm, your competitive advantage is the type of people you hire. And I see law firms make mistakes all the time because I'm talking to both candidates and law firms all day. And I've been doing it for 20 years, and our recruiters have as well. And so this is a webinar and an opportunity to learn about this. And then typically the way these webinars go is we'll present a topic. And then as I'm presenting the topic, if people have questions at the end, I would typically take questions. When we do these for candidates, sometimes they go as long as 4 or 5 hours. I don't anticipate this one going that long. The webinar itself won't go that long, but then as many questions as people have, I will answer them and stick around. There's really 4 things that people need to understand, or law firms need to understand, when you're trying to hire for a legal job. And the first one is, can you do the job, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And then the other 3, I will talk about one each week, the next week. The second one is, can you be managed? Meaning, will you do assignments and follow directions and so forth and do things the way the law firm wants you to? And then the next one after that is, will you do the job long term? Which means, are you going to stick around? Is it likely that you'll stick around in the job, or are you the kind of person that's going to leave? And obviously you want to be able to hire for longevity and for people to stick around, because if they don't, then there's a replacement cost, and that costs money, obviously. And then the fourth one is, if the person really wants the job, and you want to hire people that want to work there. And many times law firms will hire people that don't want to work there. And if they don't want to work there, they're just going to leave. And then there's a couple other questions that people tend to ask, and that's whether or not you like the attorney, and the offshoot of that is whether or not they're a cultural fit. So this one today, I'm going to talk about the first one, which is, can they do the job, which is really, for most employers, the one that they pay attention to the most closely. But it's also, in my opinion, one that has where you can make a lot of mistakes and where a lot of stuff can go wrong in terms of the decisions you make when you're hiring people. And this is something, by the way, that even recruiters in our company that have been here 5-10 years struggle with on an ongoing basis, in terms of how these sorts of matches are made for people that are likely to be able to do and not do the job. Okay, typically what happens when an employer is interviewing people is, you need to understand whether or not the person can do the job that the employer is hiring for. And this is very difficult because it can really vary from firm to firm. And here are some examples of types of people that, always you can decide who cannot do the job. One of the things that's important, obviously, is the attorney's intellectual ability compared to the sophistication of the work and the types of clients and so forth that the attorney is going to be working with. And in most law firms, especially large law firms, hire based on who seems like they're going to be the smartest for a particular job. So they want attorneys from the best law schools and with the best grades. And honestly, different types of attorneys are going to perform differently in different types of environments. And this is something that most employers understand instinctively. So an example is, they look at things like the law school they went to and how well they did there. You look at the quality of the attorney's past employers. You'll look at the practice area that they're in, how long the attorney's been employed in various employers, resume gaps, and basically make a decision of whether or not the attorney is good enough. And then the final thing is the ability to generate business, if the person's at a partner level or close to it. So the first one, which most people in the recruiting industry, or almost everyone, is familiar with, is the quality of the law school and the attorney's performance there. Attorneys, when you're hiring attorneys based on a law school, the person may be over or underqualified for the job. So sometimes, in terms of the law school performance, attorneys may hire underqualified or overqualified attorneys. And these can both be fairly significant mistakes. So if you hire an underqualified attorney, just one second. Sorry, there's some work going on outside my office. But sometimes law firms will hire underqualified attorneys. And what that means is someone that really doesn't have the intellectual ability to keep up with the work that's going on or the attorneys that are around them. If you hire someone who's intellectually unqualified, which a lot of times law firms do, then the more qualified attorneys are probably most often going to run circles around them in terms of insight. They may avoid working with them and they'll pretty much, the attorney will be cast out and won't do well. And also, it doesn't look good if you're a very prestigious firm and you're hiring, people that don't have good legal backgrounds. It's not going to look good to clients, and people will be on inconsequential assignments, and it's just not a good long-term idea. So here's just a few mistakes that I've seen law firms make. I once saw a top law firm where I work. They hired a graduate that was from barely accredited law school in the middle of the class because the client was a significant client of the firm, and he literally could not understand most of the issues. People wouldn't give him work, and he couldn't do the job. And so that was obviously didn't work. And that is something that is not that common, but it does happen. And another firm I've seen this actually happen a couple times, hired an LLM from a foreign country who graduated from Harvard Law School, and the attorney had some difficulties understanding the differences between case law and civil law. I've also seen law firms hire, especially during kind of the internet boom, it was just 1998 to 2000, lots of attorneys who were not good students from third tier law schools because there was a real demand for corporate attorneys. And most of those attorneys couldn't keep up. That's just kind of what happens, and typically doesn't work out. So most law firms, obviously your brand is going to be dependent on the types of attorneys that you hire, and it makes a big difference. And also it's part of the culture of most firms. Law firms and the attorneys there tend to be comfortable with the sorts of attorneys that are working there, and so they want to have people that are like them. And if attorney doesn't have necessarily the intellectual firepower and drive to compete, they're just going to be unhappy, and most of them are going to leave on their own. You do need to hire people that are able to keep up and that have the drive and historical record of achievement for your firm if you're a high level firm, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need those kind of people at every firm, or depending on the kind of work, but in most cases that's important. And the other thing that a lot of law firms do, and this is actually a much bigger mistake than hiring attorneys that are underqualified. When a law firm hires an overqualified attorney, what tends to happen is that attorney will often believe that the work that they're doing isn't important enough, and they'll almost always leave. Many times they can really talk their way into getting positions, but they'll feel like the compensation they're getting paid is not enough. They'll feel like the brand's not good enough. They may complain about the quality of the work, the responsibility level. And these sorts of attorneys, literally, I see them applying every day to work with our firm, and they rarely stick around. And here are just some recent mistakes that I've seen. I see lots of mid-sized firms hire people that can't get jobs when there's major slowdowns in major markets. So they may be like an Ivy League educated corporate attorney from a New York firm when there's a big slowdown, and the attorneys at the mid-sized firm may not be as good as in the larger firms. And those attorneys will almost always leave when the work picks up, and they'll complain and they'll be unhappy and they'll undermine your morale. The other thing that happens is, if a small law firm with attorneys from local law schools may hire someone that didn't get a job when they were on campus interviewing, this happens a lot because there's always people even from the top law schools that don't get jobs, and that attorney will almost always leave as well. It's something that you need to avoid in your lateral hiring, and also something many times you need to avoid in hiring new attorneys. And that's not always the case, but for the most part, when you hire overqualified attorneys, many times they're going to leave. And I see law firms make these mistakes all the time. I see them always hire overqualified attorneys that won't stick around. I see them hire underqualified attorneys. But at the same time, most attorneys try to work at the best law firms they can. And they don't all do that, but they do. So if you're hiring attorneys that you believe can work in a much better firm, you're really going to have to there's going to have to be some very convincing reasons for them to stay there instead of moving. Because in my experience, most partners and most associates are always in the market to some extent looking for better opportunities. So I would say the number is actually over 50%. So if I call someone with a better opportunity, they're almost always going to be interested in something better. Not always, but more than half the time. So you can tell the quality of an attorney's intellectual ability to some extent by their law school and their performance there. But the better way of doing that, in my opinion, is the quality of the employer the attorney is coming from. And that, to me, is really the best way to tell if someone can do the job, because different law firms and different employers have different standards. And all law school shows is the person's kind of ability to do well in college and whatever they majored in, and then do well in standardized tests, and then do well in law school. But people can become good attorneys at different speeds. That gets into a very good law firm and moves to even a better one and stays there a long time is, in my opinion, a much better gauge of the quality of the attorney that you're hiring. And I think that it's something that the best law firms understand this instinctively as well. And they actually believe it's more important, I think, than law school and even law school performance to some extent. So if someone has significant experience with a top legal employer, most often means they can do the job. And people that do well in great law schools can still be horrible attorneys. And it really has very little to do with just taking law school exams and so forth. The most important component, in my opinion, is how long people remain in employers, because most legal employers will push people out, or the people will leave if they're not up to par with what the law firm is expecting of them. And so if you have somebody that's been in a very good legal employer for 3 or 4 years or longer, the odds are that they're going to be pretty good at their job, especially if you know who they've been working with and so forth. So I tend to think that, in my opinion, is absolutely, it almost doesn't matter where they went to law school at that point. They've been at a good firm and in your practice area for several years. And the problem with hiring people from inferior legal employers, which law firms do also from time to time, is that they may not be able to do the job. They may have developed work habits and so forth that are not necessarily going to help you. Those work habits may make them a little bit sloppy. They may make them reach conclusions more quickly than a major firm would with the same matters. And they may have developed processes where they're not as thorough and so forth, and where they cut corners and all sorts of things. And that's not to say that all inferior legal employers are like that, but what people in the market's paying for when it comes to clients is they're paying for the higher billing firms, the kind of standards you're getting, and for the most part, and inferior employers, you don't necessarily know that as well. That's why you really need to look at the quality of the legal employer that the person's coming from. In many cases, you may want to investigate it, because just because you haven't heard of a firm doesn't mean that it's not a good firm. So you should look at the attorneys there, where they worked and so forth. And the problem is, though, is that many smaller, less prestigious employers can be under a lot of pressure to do work quickly and with low budgets. And attorneys just over time will pick up those bad habits. And almost that breaking those bad habits can be very difficult. And if you're in a major market and you hire people from a smaller market, there could be much different quality standards in terms of what's expected. Your better attorneys, not always, but your better attorneys are going to come from, in most cases, in terms of their thoroughness, will come from larger markets or larger firms. And if you're talking about certain types of work, and because of the detail, and the smaller markets, they also can be very good attorneys as well. But typically, the larger clients that they're working on, the more time that they can put into the work and the different types of habits they'll have. And so you may not want attorneys like that put in like all that time as well. You may want people that can get work out the door very quickly. So you have to understand what type of legal employer you are, and then also what type of employer, what type of business you want to run as an attorney, depending on the type of attorney you're hiring. And then the other thing that's very important is the person's experience in a practice area. Law firms all the time, the best law firms tend to be very specialized. So they have people that do only one thing, and often one thing within one practice area. And many times in smaller law firms as well, they have people that do multiple things. And so I'm not saying one's better than the other, but most of the time, if you're hiring an attorney for a specialist role, the more experience an attorney has in that actual practice area, and the longer that experience, the more suitable they're going to be for the position. All the time at our company, like we have like litigators, and they may have done 7 or 8 different types of litigation, and that's not necessarily the most marketable person. The most marketable person for us is someone that may have done one type of litigation. But believe it or not, a medical malpractice litigator is probably much more marketable. A medical malpractice litigator that may not necessarily have gone to a great law school or anything is going to be much more marketable than a general commercial litigator that went to a top 10 or 20 law school because they're much more specialized. Same thing with workers' compensation and other things. The more experience an attorney has in a specific practice area or a sub-practice area within a practice area like litigation, the better, the more suitable they may be for your openings if you are looking for specialists, and because they're committed to it. And many times people try to get jobs in practice areas where they don't have the experience, and other times they try to fit in to practice areas and so forth where, or law firms try to fit them in where the person doesn't necessarily belong. So one of the strangest things that I see law firms do, and I certainly have tried placing attorneys to do this before, but I don't think it's a good idea, is try to hire people who are trying to switch practice areas. So anytime a practice area gets very popular. So right now, an example would be like data privacy is very popular. Everybody's trying to switch into data privacy. And other points in time, things like corporate have been very popular, and then people will try to switch from litigation into corporate. And anytime someone tries to switch practice areas, that's generally just a sign that the attorney just doesn't like practicing law or isn't doing well or something. And they're probably going to leave, after they decide they just don't like practicing law when they switch practice areas with you. And you're almost always better off hiring someone that just has experience in the specific practice area. Someone that, if you're looking for like a capital market securities attorney, you're almost always going to be better off hiring someone that does only that than someone that may be doing general corporate mergers and acquisitions and litigation from a generalist firm. Because someone who's a specialist not only understands the market better in more depth, but is more likely to be committed to it. And it's just smart hiring people that are committed to a practice area rather than people that aren't. And for smaller firms, obviously, you may want a more generalist person, and that may actually be better suited to you as well. And then the other thing to understand too is when you're hiring for a practice area, you need to also look beyond a lot of different things for like the person's skills. So I once worked with a small law firm, and they hired a litigator from a major top law firm, and that person had never been to court. And when that person got there, they were expected to go to court and take depositions and do all sorts of things. And that level of bookishness was suited to a large firm, but that attorney was, ejected from that smaller firm like a virus. He just couldn't do the job. And that's very common. You have to decide, just because someone is a litigator doesn't mean they're going to, fit in your firm, or a corporate attorney doesn't mean they're going to fit in your firm. I see things all the time, for example, with corporate attorneys that come out of firms, say Sullivan and Cromwell, and then wind up trying to work at firms in the Bay Area where they might not have as much responsibility as they were given on deals when they were working at Sullivan and Cromwell in New York, and they are very unhappy. So you have to understand how that experience translates. And that's very important. And every practice area has specific requirements, and you need to understand that as well. And the final kind of thing that I think is very important, and this is really when you're evaluating who's going to be a good hire, especially laterally, this, in my experience, is the number one test. And it's when you're trying to hire someone, it's always how long have they stayed at their previous employer and why are they looking for a job? So as part of my position, I work with a lot of people. I also coach partners inside of law firms about their careers and even professionally coach them. And I noticed that if somebody leaves their job every 2 years, a partner, the odds are they're going to leave their next job in 2 years too. Same thing with associates. And it's just everybody, if you see one move's probably okay once in a while, like every couple of years or maybe 1 or 2 years in your practice, but people that move a lot, that's not a good sign. And even a couple moves is in the short period of time, because some people, are able to get along wherever they go and others aren't. And some people figure out the rules and how to get along and others don't. And some people are leaving simply because they're not doing good work, or you don't know, or they may not want to practice law, or they think that. And so if people aren't staying at their employers a long time, they don't have very good reasons for leaving, then they probably can't do the job. The first 2 recruiters I hired at BCG was very interesting to me. This has been definitely a learning experience doing this for the past 20 plus years, but I've had a lot of people as working in recruiting capacity here. And you can imagine that in this particular role, you get a lot of people that come in and they want to try something besides practicing law. So they do this and they may not necessarily be fit. And so they'll stay a year or 2 years, not very long, and then they'll do something else. But in the first 2 people I hired, one of them had been her previous employer for 6 years. And she stayed here 8 years. And the second one had been in her previous employer for 13 years, and she stayed here for 16 years. And During that time, I don't know what the number was, but probably 30, 50 people had come and gone that had all been at their previous legal employers for a year or two. And they all left too. They all left within a year or two and they went somewhere else. In most cases, left a year or two as well. So anytime you see stability in someone's background, whether it's in employment before law school, in signs of a lot of stability, then that's actually very smart because those people are going to work out, they're going to play by the rules, and they're going to figure out what it takes to succeed in your law firm. And I think this is honestly the most important thing to really keep in mind when you're hiring. And so the other thing about being able to do the job is whether or not the attorney is going to be able to do the things that are required of you. And to some extent, this relates to management, which I'm going to talk about next week. Every attorneys, when they leave firms, they always give all sorts of reasons for leaving. They'll say things like, I had to work in groups. There's certain firms like Paul Hastings, for example, they have these groups where people would work, and other firms expect you to work independently. Other firms may expect you to work with someone who's extremely difficult. Other firms, smaller firms, or even larger firms sometimes require you to work in multiple practice areas. Some law firms have extremely long hours, and depending on the firm, there's going to be different requirements. And there's traveling, there's face time, there's entertainment, there's business, there's supervising or not supervising, doing projects, weekends, and secretarial work or not, and socializing. And then there's things like working with socially objectionable clients, tolerating negative press about the firm, which in some firms there's just a lot of negative press. There's never being able to make partner and not having really any chance of that at a firm. There's below market compensation, performance reviews, not performance reviews, benefits, branch offices. And I could go on working for one client. And these are all reasons that people have told me they were leaving their firms in just the past several months. So if you look at these reasons, there's just so many of them that I just literally wrote down what came to mind. And when I wrote this down, it took me about 5 minutes, and I was just thinking of recent conversations. Someone saying they had to work weekends, someone saying they had to do secretarial work. And it's just so people will leave a firm, and because they'll find reasons that they don't like your firm, and sometimes are just things that aren't good. So you really need to understand those questions, whether or not those are things that the attorney can do. And so if the attorney starts talking about things about why they're leaving their existing firm, and they bring up some of those sorts of things, and those are requirements of your job, then that's probably going to be the type of attorney that may not be able to do your job. Another way that I think is very good to ask in interviews, and these are just some questions and suggestions that I have, but asking an attorney how busy they are. I've had a lot of instances where I've worked with attorneys and they've been interviewing with firms, and I haven't asked them this question, and they may get far along with the firm, and then the firm just kind of senses there's something off or something wrong, and they're not making an offer. And then I ask them this question, and the attorney comes back and they say, yes, I'm not busy, I'm not getting work, it's so hard to get work at this firm, and all this sort of thing. So asking an attorney how busy they are is really one of the most important things you can do, regardless of what type of recruiting role you're in. If you're a hiring partner, you're in the whatever your recruiting position is. But once you ask that information, typically that's going to give you a very good insight into how well the attorney is doing at their existing firm and how good they are. Because this is just a very good way to understand the quality of work and the motivation of the attorney. And most almost every law firm has partners that are busy and that have a lot of work. And if your firm has a lot of work, if the person doesn't have a lot of work, then they're probably not the best partner in that firm, or the best associate, or whatever their job is. And the best attorneys are also very good at generating work. It's an important job at every firm for an attorney to be very good at generating work and able to do that. And so that's another important point. And getting work translates later into how good the person is with getting work with clients. So if an attorney is complaining that there's not a lot of work in their firm, which they do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then they should be saying there's not a lot of work, but I'm doing all this stuff. I'm writing articles, giving presentations, trying to generate clients. And so there should be a level of internal motivation, even with first years and that sort of thing, that shows that they're just really committed to the profession. They should be busy. They should be trying to get work. They should be offering to work on things. And the people that are the best are always going to be the busiest. They're going to figure out how to benefit the group the most. And so asking them if there's enough work, even if the firm doesn't have any work, which generally is not the case, then they'll do that. If people wait around for work, they're typically not good hires. Attorneys who don't that say there's not a lot of work don't have the ability to create work, and they need to be able to create work. Attorneys who are doing bad work aren't given work. So there's just a lot of problems. Attorneys that upset people or unable to get along with people don't have a lot of work. So you actually want to know, it's important to know how much work the person has. And the busiest attorneys are always the best attorney. That's just something to keep in mind, and a very good question to understand if someone can do the job at your firm. And it's very difficult. And there's no other way really to understand how smart the person is and how good they are in the office other than that question, because there's certainly no other way to do it. There's how long the person's been at the firm. There's, which I told you about earlier, there's their commitment to their practice area. There's whether or not they switch jobs and so forth. But asking if they have a lot of work is another good way. Another question that's good to ask is what partners they're working for. If you review the partners on a law firm's website or who they are, the people that are working with the best partners are typically doing the best work, and others may not be trying to work with those partners, and so they may only be working with senior associates and so forth, or counsel, and that's not always the best sign. Now, it depends on the quality of the firm and the size of the firm and so forth. But if you can understand who the person's working for, that can also give you a lot of insight. When I'm talking to associates and partners even, I'll ask them who they're working for or we're doing most of their work with. And once I get that information, it gives me a lot of insight into the quality of the attorney. And that's something that I can use then to market the person and make them look more attractive. And then you should also ask them what partners they've worked with in the past. And so that's another important thing. And then how long they work with that partner. And then the best attorneys will typically be very enthusiastic about the partners that they worked with and love talking about that. So that's another sign that the attorney is probably very good. And the thing is that a lot of times you'll get these answers. The attorney will say something like, I've just been doing a lot of small assignments. I'm doing this memo and I've worked for this person and this person, but I haven't worked anybody for a long period of time. That right there probably tells you that the person's not doing good work. Because if they were doing good work, one person would be giving them work over a long period of time, or a couple of people would. And if they're doing discrete assignments, that's not a good thing. Another good question to ask is, what are you working on? The best attorneys are typically going to be working on the biggest cases in their firm, and they're going to be very enthusiastic about it. And they'll be working on whether the biggest transactions or whatever it is. And the firm's going to put them on that because it wants to put their best people on it. So that's another way to tell that. If you ask an attorney, for example, what are you working on? The firm has a lot of important matters, and then they tell you about very insignificant things they're doing. That's going to tell you probably that they're issues. It may not be with the quality of the work. It could be their personality. No, but that's not good. I was talking to an attorney once that looked like a very good litigator, had gone to a very good law school and had worked at a very good firm, but they had taken him off of all of the normal litigation the firm was doing and had him just sue clients for unpaid bills. And so that was not a good sign. If a senior attorney is telling you they're doing only discovery, and that's not a good sign. You can tell with these sorts of questions. And then I've seen very good attorneys. I saw one woman that was a second-year associate at a huge law firm. I don't remember what it was. It was Sidley or something, a very good law firm. And she was doing trials. I think she was on her second trial. They were giving her trials to do. It was just incredible. A fourth-year associate telling her the lead associate in IPO, like all those sorts of things. If someone's giving you a lot of responsibility and they're getting a lot of responsibility in a very competitive environment, that's typically a very good attorney. And law firms give attorneys work based on their perception of the quality of the attorney and how good they are. And that's something that a lot of times people ignore. And all these questions, by the way, one of the mistakes that I think that a lot of law firms make is they want to hire someone. So there's a demand to bring someone in because you're losing money if you don't have the work being done, or you like someone or you like their qualifications. But when you start asking these questions, you can very quickly understand who's good and who's not. And really figure out who's going to do well in your firm and very quickly. And it depends on your firm, of course, but if the person should be there and they're the quality of attorney that you normally hire, you just need to be very careful hiring laterals, because you don't want to make a decision where you hire the wrong person. And because it's expensive, because the wrong person can not be productive, they can undermine morale, the partners won't give them work, it creates human resources headaches, it undermines the morale of a lot of existing attorneys. So in the role of HR and hiring people, there's nothing really more important than understanding all this. And because it really sets the whole direction of the firm. And the longer I've been doing this, the more I see how important the HR role is in making these decisions, because it affects the whole firm and its success. Another question that's important is what you think you can improve on. Lawyers are asked that question, and based on what they say, you can often tell how good the attorney is. So some bad answers. I heard one attorney was asked to leave a very prestigious firm, and I asked him, what do you think you could do differently? And he said, I need to have paralegals and legal secretaries proofread my work more. I make too many errors. And that's obviously not a good answer, because he should be doing that. And he's the attorney. That was a bad answer. And then I also heard someone with very low hours say I should be better at asking for assignments. My hours are low. So it's not just about asking for assignments. People should want to give you work. And so that's a bad answer to what you think you can improve on. And the best answers are things like when an attorney talks about wanting to do more business development, or they want to improve their ability to take depositions or run their own transactions. Those are very good signs. If you see people like that, anything that shows that they're trying to improve and get better in a way that makes them look good. And even many times the best attorneys that I speak to do stuff like they talk about. I notice this, by the way, for lots of the partners that have a ton of business. And I've always noticed partners with big books of business, even though they have these big books of business, they'll always talk about all these books they're reading, these outside courses they're taking, things they're listening to. And those types of attorneys that are growing tend to take their jobs very seriously. And it shows a willingness to improve and seek greater challenges and so forth. And some people never stop growing, and other people do. Some people stop growing right when they get out of law school, or even when they get into law school to some extent. Another good question that can tell you the quality of the attorney is, what do you like most about what you're doing? I think that statements like I love learning, that show an enthusiasm and growth and improvement are also good. I like finding solutions other people don't see, contracts, and finding new ways to do things and protect my client. Those sorts of statements really bring out and show you who the best attorneys are. And unfortunately, most of the attorneys, a lot of them that you interview, will give bland answers, and they'll show a lack of their practice here and enthusiasm. And the problem with that is that your firm and its direction is going to be shaped by the quality of your hires. So if you hire a bunch of people that are bland and unenthusiastic, that's going to be the culture of your firm. And that's going to be how your clients are served. And if you hire other types of people, they're going to inspire the people around them, and it's going to be a very good investment. And then the other one is, what clients are you working for? And most law firms will talk about who their clients are on their website. So it's very easy to find that information out. And most law firms have top clients, and there's less significant clients. And so if an attorney is working with their law firm's biggest clients and has a lot of responsibility, the odds are they're doing good work. And that's important. If they're working on less significant matters, then the opposite's often true. So that's just something to keep in mind. So ask them what clients they're working in. So all these things, if you ask all these questions, you immediately can understand the pecking order of the attorney within the law firm. And once you understand their pecking order within the law firm, then you're going to be much better suited to decide who is the right person, if the person's a good attorney there. Another question you can ask is, have you done any work in your practice area? Have you done any outside work in your practice area? And attorneys that are interested in what they're doing will take all sorts of outside courses, they'll write articles, many will teach class in night school, CLE, and all sorts of things to contribute their enthusiasm for the market. If you think about how to find people that really like what they're doing, if they talk about things like that, then they're going to really like what they're doing. So you want to hire people like that. You want to hire people that are enthusiastic, because those are the kind of people that are going to bring in clients or impress clients and really provide a good service based for your firm in the future. Another question you can ask is how confident you feel about your ability to do this job based on what you know about it. They may know something about the job. And this really is a good question as well, because the attorney's confidence in their work will come through. Attorneys have all sorts of challenges that they experience daily. Even the most experienced attorney does not have complete confidence in every situation. And the most confident attorneys will typically, and the best attorneys will always ask for help when necessary. They'll gather information, they'll figure out the answers, they'll look at all sides of the equation and so forth. And then many times other attorneys will just kind of spout off a answer that they can do anything and so forth. And that's not always the best thing to do. But you need to hire people that do have confidence. And then a lack of confidence just means that maybe they're afraid of doing certain assignments or afraid of doing certain things. I've seen people that are afraid to take depositions, or people that are afraid to go to court, or people that are afraid to talk to clients, or be involved in certain parts of transactions. And that's just not good. Those are not the kind of people that you want to hire. And then another one is references. It's funny because each of these questions I've seen just eliminate people. I've seen just one of these questions, if you ask, some people will cave. So you can ask people what their references would say. And most attorneys will have lots of references, and they'll have people that you can call that they may have worked with in previous firms that will talk about them enthusiastically. And they have people, they'll have clients that would be happy to talk about you. They have, in contrast, your poor to average attorneys won't have those references, or they can't really articulate what a reference would say about them. So this just shows the person's interpersonal skills and their ability to get along with others, and all that sort of thing when they have good references. And so that's important. And keep in mind that anytime someone has worked at a place in the past legal employer is no different than a client. And some people are able to impress clients with their interpersonal skills and work skills, and others aren't. If an attorney is impressed former employers, you get good recommendations, and the odds are good they did well with their app in the past. Now, obviously, even the best attorneys burn bridges with clients and former employers all the time. And so there's nothing wrong with them not having the greatest references. And honestly, sometimes because of that, there's a code among certain firms where they won't even say anything negative about a previous employee. But if they say something very positive, that's a sign. And a lot of times they won't say anything negative. They'd rather say nothing than something negative. That's more than half the cases. But if there's a lot of very glowing references from the person in their past, that's obviously a very good sign. And I also don't ever recommend checking references of the current employer. Sometimes an attorney may be moving home from another state and will offer you to say you can check them, but typically you don't want to ever check references of the current employer, even if the person says you can't. I don't understand why certain firms insist on doing that. I don't think it really accomplishes anything. I think you're better off going to the person's past. And you may even talk to some place where they were a summer associate, or they worked in the summer where they worked before they went to law school. You can still get an appraisal to some extent of the person's character. But I don't think you should ever talk to the person's current employer. And in law firms will ask for permission to do that, but I just don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it ever gets anywhere. Many times people will call HR and get that information. Other people will call attorneys the person worked with. If you are in HR and you're calling HR, you're often just going to get, many times you'll get standard type answers, or if you're an HR person, you're close with other HR people, you will get very honest answers. And so most law firms are very good at getting the information they want in different ways. And there's certainly, that's a way to get good information. But I always recommend trying to also speak with people that they worked with as well sometimes if you can. And then another good question you can ask is samples of work. This will tell you quite a bit. You can always get copies of things with clients' information redacted and so forth. And regardless of the attorney's level of experience, they should always have some work that they can show you. And so that's also something that I recommend. And you can gain a lot from looking at an attorney's work product. You can see how they think and what they think is good work versus bad work, and so forth. I don't know that that should be the be all end all in terms of that, because I know that a lot of people disqualify people that probably shouldn't be qualified, that can learn to improve their work based on the work that they turn in, but it's up to the firm. I know that there's one firm on the West Coast, it brings in patent attorneys from all over California and has them take a test. And the test is so complicated. It has the opportunities to make some of the most arcane errors that anybody could ever make. And I don't think anybody has ever passed this test. I don't know why the law firm thinks it's necessary. They've never hired anybody, as far as I know, in over 10 years. And it's just a waste of time. I don't really get it. But the point is that they make it very difficult by this form of testing the sample of their work. And I don't think it's a good idea. Writing samples are another thing. I think that's always a good idea to get that from litigators especially, and that can be helpful, but you need to be careful about disqualifying people for that. And then a lot of times you'll be interviewing unemployed people, and you always need to ask them why they're not working. For many firms, it's just being unemployed is such a warning sign that people just won't hire anybody who's unemployed. And you definitely, I don't recommend that. I do think that unemployed people should be interviewed if it looks like they would otherwise be good attorneys. but it's a very risky thing. And in some major markets, by the way, like New York, most major firms, just because there's many times warning problems with people being on warning signs, they look at it as a warning sign. They would just rather not even interview the person rather than take a chance. And the reason that attorneys are unemployed many times is because they might have been asked to leave. They might not have been given any work and just felt, guilty even coming to the work and to the office. So they might have been fired. They may have had psychological issues that made them quit, meaning, I don't know, they wanted to, who knows? You just never know. But these are some of the reasons many times that people are unemployed. Many times they're unable to fit in at the firm. People weren't giving them work. They wanted to do something else. They thought they wanted to travel, start a business. Substance abuse problems is another common one that I've seen several times in my career. Many times their family will take precedence over their jobs, and they may have done something stupid where they just kind of lost face or lost their job. Many times the law firms saw them as gossipers and having a bad attitude. I've seen people get caught posting bad comments about their firm online on firm computers and so forth, or just being caught gossiping and saying bad things. And so none of these things are true all the time, but law firms, I think it's very risky and will let people go because these are all things for the most part that you can't, if someone's unemployed, you can't always figure out if it's really true. People will give answers. But the big thing is if someone's unemployed, then there's something more important to them than working. And the legal profession expects people to always be working that's just a rule and I didn't make it up. But there are reasons that I think that it's okay to hire attorneys that are unemployed. And I place unemployed attorneys all the time. So I have nothing against them. And I don't think you should either, but I think you should evaluate very closely why they're unemployed. Many times people will also learn lessons when they're unemployed. And so that's important. Some things that happen that result in people losing their jobs are things like practice groups jumping and leaving, like all the partners leaving and leaving the associates without work. I've seen during recessions, law firms may hire entire classes of corporate associates. And then the next year there's a recession and they have no work for them and they have to let them go. Those are things that really weren't the fault of the person. Sometimes a whole practice group is let go. Some law firms will phase out practice areas like for employment, and attorneys may move home to be with a sick parent. But the thing to keep in mind is most of these cases, when firms close offices and so forth, they do give warning and people do have time to find jobs. And the best attorneys typically will have people helping them in the firm find jobs. And if an attorney's 100% in the game of practicing law, they're always prioritizing their careers and staying employed until they find something else. And so that's just something you want to keep in mind. You certainly can hire whoever you want, but in most cases, you do want to probably prioritize hiring people that are employed if you can. And it's just a lot of times if you see repeated periods of unemployment, you're probably going to see that again. So with you. And then the final one I want to just discuss because it's important, especially for senior attorneys, is the ability to generate business. And some attorneys are able to generate business, others aren't. And in many, if it's a requirement of staying employed, then or being employed in a firm, then you should always see how attorneys are going to respond. Many times, law firms will interview attorneys that promise they're going to generate business in the future. That almost always never works out. I've seen it happen, but it's rare. People will come up with business plans and all sorts of things and say why they're going to generate business in the future. But again, it's rare. It doesn't happen most of the time because if they were able to generate business, they would generate it where they are. The other thing is that you may just be seeking worker bees, and that's fine. But then you want to hire worker bees and not people that look like they're going to generate business. Generally, someone that's able to generate business has always generated business, and that's just how it is. I talk to litigators all the time that say, oh, how am I supposed to generate business as a litigator when cases come and go? There are people out there that consistently generate $5 or $10 million or more in litigation per year. And that's just who they are. And I don't know how they do it. It's none of my business, but they do. And it's the same thing with corporate attorneys and people in different practice areas. So if you want people with business, there's all sorts of people that will come up with business plans and so forth and tell you that they're going to generate business. But in most cases, that's not going to work out for you. And it's going to be expensive. It's going to lower morale. It's going to create issues. And the people will get there and just nothing will happen many times. And the final thing is if you're trying to hire for business generation to grow your firm, which you should, then you always want to see an upward trajectory. People that are bringing in one amount one year, one amount the next year, and so forth. It's going to consistently, there's going to be consistent business coming in, and that's just how it is. So one year they'll bring in smaller firm, they might bring in 100,000, and 200, and then 250, 300. That's good. That's showing that they're doing something and they're servicing the clients well, and they're making sure that the bills are the clients are happy, and everything is working. And other times it's not. The best attorneys always figure out how to build business, and that's just how it works. And if the book's declining, then they're doing something wrong, and probably not worth the risk. And sometimes they're in the wrong environment, and that's true. Sometimes there's environments that are wrong for that type of attorney and their client and the type of business they're generating. But most attorneys without business will not generate business in a new firm, and they can, but basically the people figure out how to succeed wherever they are. I do think that there's some firms where it can be almost impossible to generate business, but for the most part, if you're hired for that, you need to understand that. And the final thing to understand is that when an attorney is representing the amount of business that they're going to bring over to your firm when you're hiring them, most times, not always, but most firms will give the rule that it's twice what is they're actually going to bring. So if someone says they're going to bring 2 million, it's often 1 million. If someone says they're going 1 million, it's often 500,000, and so forth. It's not always the case, but you need to be careful. And I hate to be so pessimistic, because I certainly am in the business of not being pessimistic. But what I am trying to do is advise you how to hire the best attorneys and not make mistakes. So that is the presentation. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And it looks like there are some. So let's see here. First one, let me just give me 1 second here. Stop the share. 1 second. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the first question is, when it comes to finding the best attorneys, I must be doing something wrong. It seems like the candidates we interview look great on paper, but don't impress us during the interviews. Are we looking in the wrong places? What can we do to make sure we broaden our search and attract talent from other areas? And typically, with most positions, you want to make sure that you're advertising them as widely as you can. Recruiters can help, but another thing that would be helpful as well is making sure that you're doing whatever you can to bring in the right type of people. Often using attorneys within your own firm to try to find people is a good idea, and that is really what I'd recommend. But using your own attorneys and then advertising quite widely. But I don't know what your criteria are during interviews, but you may want to put that into your job description as well. Okay, we hired an underqualified attorney. What can we do about it? Should we train them or just let them go? So if you hire underqualified attorneys, then many times you can train them. It just depends if they are able to rise to the level of what you're looking for. Let's see here. Our company does not have any information available online, as we are in startup stealth mode. So it would be possible to research our company before we hire them. What other things can we do to gauge their interest level? Lots of attorneys are interested in working for startup type companies. And what I would recommend is, if you're interested in hiring an attorney, then you put up that you're a startup, and lots of attorneys are willing to take that risk, especially from major firms. And they really do want to find the best position that they can. And that to them is exciting, because they believe that if they go to a company, they may be able to make a lot of money with stock options and all those sorts of things. I do think that hiring attorneys in stealth mode can be, for a stealth mode type company, is something that the right person will jump at. And you're going to have a certain type of person for a startup company, which would be someone that's a risk taker, than you may have in a more established company. Okay. How do we tell if someone will abide by our requirements? Do we simply ask for an interview? Yeah, if you have certain requirements for your job, then I would recommend that you just ask them and just say, these are things, is this something that's okay? One of the problems is if you hire people and those people don't work out, meaning you give them work later and they say, well, this wasn't part of my job description, or I wasn't told about this in the interviews, then that can often be a problem later. So I do recommend asking those sorts of, telling people kind of some of the requirements of the job during the interview, whether it's travel and so forth, so they can be prepared for that. Let's see. I understand that it may be a bad idea to hire an attorney coming from an inferior law firm, but at the same time, if a candidate acknowledges this and states they're looking for more responsibility and challenge, would it be a good hire? Yeah, so it's always a good idea to try to hire people that are interested in moving up, and attorneys that are interested in moving up into better firms can be great hires. It's something that I always recommend. The people that are the hungriest can often do the best. And I do think that is extremely important, and something that I recommend as well. But someone that's unqualified and can't necessarily do the work is not always a good idea. Let's see. When hiring for a role that most people would consider boring, like document review, is enthusiasm actually important? I would think anybody showing enthusiasm for a boring job is just faking it, but that may just seem jaded. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I think that if someone's looking for a position doing something like document review, then they may not come across as that enthusiastic, but you may notice that they've been doing that for a while. This presentation was really geared towards talking about people that are likely to do well in long-term type positions doing as attorneys. And so a document review, of course, can be an attorney, but many times people doing those sorts of jobs, the hiring standards can be a lot different. Let's see. If an attorney could be considered overqualified, but say they are looking for reduced hours or more flexibility and they get their current job, do you still think they might leave in short order? Yes. So I think if someone could be overqualified, but they are looking for reduced hours or flexibility that they may not get in another employer, then that potential person, that's a very good question, could be someone that might leave as well. How do you assess a first year candidate will be capable of doing the job? Should you be looking more at their law school grades, extracurriculars, or something else? Typically, first year attorneys, people look more at their law school grades, and their extracurriculars is how they evaluate them. But mainly law school grades, quality of the law school, and then any type of stability you may have seen the person have in the past is typically one of the best things. So any stability they may have had in previous jobs and so forth is always a good sign. Okay, that is it. And I appreciate all the questions. And we will do next week, we'll cover how to manage attorneys as well in this 6-part webinar series. And then we'll be doing webinars after this, but these are the questions I wanted to cover this week. Thank you.